Welcome to Chapter 9. Here we'll cover how to use effects animation in jQuery. So our objective here is to use jQuery to add effects and animations to a web page. So we're going to try to, just like last week when we got started with jQuery, describe the use of methods now for effects. So we know a few methods already. But now we're going to go into methods that you might be able to use for effects, especially in your final projects. The first thing we want to do is describe how to stop and start a slideshow with an interval timer. We covered interval timers and timers in general last week. In general terms, we want to talk about the animate method and how we can use it to chain other effects onto it. So what we want to do is use callback functions when an animation hits a certain point. There are a bunch of other methods too. You see in point 5 here. One is delay, one is stop, and one is finish. All of these shorthanded methods can be used with something in JavaScript, but it would take a lot more code, which is why the use of jQuery. Lastly, we'll describe the use of easings with effects and animations. Easings can help our animations pop a little more and give the user an idea when it slows down. So this is what we're going to learn. We're going to learn the show method, hide method, toggle, which is toggle I use all the time, by the way. That's a huge one. All the top 3 right there, show, hide, and toggle are good. Slide down, slide up, and slide toggle, I don't use that much. Fade in, fade out, I have used. Fade toggle and fade to, a little less so. But all of these are very specific in what they do. And if you understand and know about them, they're more easily utilized. It's kind of exciting to do because you don't see many animations in web development or web design anymore because content is king. But if you want your elements to pop, these methods can really help you. And where might that be? Well, think about your portfolio website for this program at Mesa. You might want to have some animation to really call attention to certain parts of that portfolio website, or maybe to the resume, or maybe to the About You part. So in the Mesa curriculum, I really point to jQuery as being a positive element that you can add to your portfolio mix. So the basic syntax for all these methods, except for the fade to, which we'll cover, is you put your method name, and then it takes a couple of arguments. The first one is the duration, and then the second argument is what you see in that top there. It's called a callback, but it's what happens after the duration. So the duration happens, and the callback is what executes after. And the fade to, as you can see, is you've got a duration, then an opacity, and then a callback. So when it fades to, we can control how visible it is using the opacity, and that'll be a decimal, which we'll see. You just need to see examples. Like my development career, I can tell you, is you just keep the docs open and toggle back and forth. And the more things you build, you're going to be fine. You know how to go to where you need to go when you need help. This is one of those things that just help us and that you can utilize without much stress at all. So this right here is, we're going to start some jQuery and an application. And this is creating a startup message. So I've got an ID at the top that is startup message and temporarily under construction in a header, right? I target that startup message and use the fadeOut 5000. And then, and you can see I actually have the element, the selector, startup message, and then the method, and then how long it's going to take. It's always in milliseconds, so 5,000 is 5 seconds. The next element, right in this section, is chaining. So what happens is we've got a startup message now that fades out after 5 seconds and then slides down for a second. So basically it'll do this when you chain and then this after it when the 5 seconds is up. So you can see chains that are 7 or 8 things long, and you know, in other classes like this, I would assign a person to chain a box to go up a ladder just by using chaining to go, you know, right, left, and then up to climb a stair, almost like the Donkey Kong video game where you climb ladders. So that's kind of a fun thing, but our course right now is too constricted to really branch out to that. Plus, we're moving in an area where React is kind of taking over for some of jQuery's essentials, but React still uses jQuery. Anyway, these are going to be two separate fade out. So look at this. In 5 seconds, the opacity, because fade 2 has that opacity as a second element, it's going 5 seconds, it goes down to 1/5 or 0.2 opacity. Excuse me. And then in another second, it goes fade 2 and it's fully visible. So it starts from 0 to a little bit and then fully visible. And this right here is a callback function, meaning once something happens, the second parameter, this event happens. So let's read this. We're targeting the startup message, and then we have the fade2 method, and it takes that extra argument. So in 5 seconds, it'll be at 0.2 opacity. And then after that, we're going to run this function, and whatever the current target is, it will fade to in 1 second to opacity 1, meaning fully visible. So these things, if you see a few apps, it's good to get the hang of, but then if you assign yourself something to add to, let's say, a site that you have, that's when the real learning gets done, and there's definitely some satisfaction there. So this is the applications, FAQ application that we've been going through throughout the course, but we're going to start doing some sexier things. We've got the plus, and we're going to control the bottom here. So as the text for a heading is displayed, I'm going to pause this for a second, pull up that application, and give you a little idea of what's going to happen. Okay, so this is an example of our FAQs application. Watch what happens when I click to open. You see the transition right there. So we'll be using toggle class with a fade, and you can see it's got a certain time period. So let's get back to the PowerPoint, and here's our HTML. So as you can see, we have 3 different H2s. What is jQuery, along with the div content, why use jQuery, we just started to learn jQuery or JavaScript. That is nothing more than this. And then we have our content inside. So pretty easy for the HTML. Now this is our slide down and fade out methods. Now we have the use strict here, and in our modules this week we have the how to use the use strict. I know I've talked about it before. It's been in other sections, but I have another article on use strict, and I suggest if you're unfamiliar with it and maybe you missed it from a prior week that you take a look, because it's just going to make sure your variable declaration is honest, and it's going to make sure that you basically use strict coding practices. So it's a great way to learn. So what we've got here is document ready, which we've already gone over. We're talking about the hashtag FAQs and its H2 tag. Remember, there are 3 of those. And when that is clicked, remember it's a plus symbol, what's going to happen is we're going to run this closure. The event is the argument, and we have a target variable, and it equals the event target. So whatever it is. And in this case, we're going to toggle the class minus. So if it's minus is showing, it won't be shown. And if it's not showing, it will be shown. And if the target attribute for a class, whatever the class is, if it does not equal minus, then we're going to go to the next step and fade out after a second. Otherwise, we'll slide down. So let's take a look at this. And I'm going to show you the JavaScript itself in the source code. So we've got the toggle class minus and the next. So that's the click event right here. This is the other way to do it, but what we're going to do is look at this section here. So what I want to do is inspect the element, and we're going to look at the toggle class when I do it. And this is the beauty of Chrome tools. I'm going to dock my dev tools in the bottom so we see it, right? And if I were to inspect the entire FAQs like this, and we were to click the top H2, like why use jQuery or what is jQuery, watch what happens. I'm going to click, and you see the style there. We see div display block right here on the div below. This is jQuery is a library, but look at the class minus on this line. If I click minus, you see the class just equals class. Again, if I click plus, you see class equals minus. That is the toggle class function. Pretty useful, right? We're toggling the class, it's adding minus or plus. And so what's happening there on that toggle class is when it's clicked, and we can take another look at this again, we're going to toggle the class name. And then we'll slide the toggle 1 second. So that's a beautiful thing. So this right here tells us that, okay, if it's minus, if it's not equal to minus, that means that we're going to fade it out. Otherwise, we'll slide down. So we're sliding down or fading out. Let's watch it again. Sliding down, fading out. Sliding down, fading out. So that's very effective. It brings your attention to that section. This is the meat of, excuse me, this is the, I'm going backwards now, but this is the meat of that event. Toggle class minus, next slide toggle. So that may be, this is the next element after, which describes the actual div. That may be confusing. Again, let's look at the source code, and we'll look at the HTML, and you'll see that this is the next for the H2. So we have ID FAQs H2, and this is next after the H2, and that's why that's the one being toggled. So good stuff. We did that in 3 lines. Those of you who feel really comfortable with vanilla.js, we would work with the style property and affect it. There's also an animate tag in HTML5 we could work with, but it would be a little bit more complicated and more code for us, and this makes it very easy. So we have a couple terms here. Effect will cover anything that moves, anything at all. Animation, of course, is the same, but the difference between an effect and an animation is that the animation moves from place to place. The effect will stay in place. The callback function is the block of code that's the second parameter of all of our functions in jQuery. It's just what happens after the first animation happens, and that callback might be a third parameter if we're using the fade2. So that's all you've learned at this point. So the next thing we're going to look at is the slideshow application with fading in and fading out. So let me pause this real quick and show you that. Okay, here we are with the slideshow, and you can see it's got the fade and a timer, and it's just going through a loop of 4 pictures. Very similar to what we've been learning throughout the text. Now I'll go back to our section here, and we'll take a look at some HTML. All right, so we've got the HTML for the slideshow application with the caption and the slide and the slides themselves. So there's a main slide that will be controlled, which is ID slide, and then there's the list of slides. So we're going to use jQuery to manipulate the slideshow. We've been revisiting the slideshow quite a bit. It started with JavaScript, and now we're at showing what jQuery can do. The fade, I think, is particularly important in this situation. So this is what they call the critical CSS for the slideshow. So we've got a fixed height on the image, but more importantly, we have every image that's in the slides div to have no display at all, hidden. And that means every image in this HTML here is going to be invisible. Now, we're going to show a few methods on this, but and you'll see the chapter 9 code that I give you will have several versions of this. We've already done image caching. This is a little bit of an each loop with jQuery, saying that for each image in the slides div, we have 2 parameters: the index, which would be a number, and the image itself. This is that jQuery's version of image caching. So we have an image that equals a new image object, and by creating an image as part of the compiled HTML, we're going to have that image in memory, and it will take less time to load. So we're saying the source itself equals the image attribute, the title itself equals the attribute for the alt tag, and the image cache with a number of an index is that image. So remember, image cache is going to be that array, which we have to fill out. So the each is creating that. So this is the very beginning of it, and it should be there should be some familiarity because you've already done this in JavaScript. So now we've got the slideshow, we've got the counter, and we've already done a counter with the slideshow. So the set interval should make sense. We're going to do it every 3 seconds. We're going to find the caption and fade it out in a second. Then the slide itself will fade out in a second, so it'll be simultaneous. Then we have our arrow syntax for ES6, and then what will go on with that fade out. We're going to add to the image counter. This is all things you've seen before in the image slideshow. And what we're going to do is make the attribute of the slide. Remember, the slide is the main picture that's showing, and its source will be equal to the next image source. And we're going to fade in at 1000, which is 1 second. And then we'll have the text will be the new image title, and we'll fade that in at 1000 again. So let's go back to the HTML real quick and look at that, because right now we have this right here. Remember, it's the array of things and the image, the main image slide. So your array of slides will choose, as we rotate through a set interval, which attribute of source is that section. So the next thing we need to do is to make sure the next image has a value. So let's move forward. And now we have the fade out if next slide dot next. So what's next slide? Well, next slide would be the slide image first child. So in this case, we're calling on the slides, and we're looking at the first image. That's when we start. And then the next would be the second image. The next would be the third image on each set of run of the interval. And the interval is at 3000, which is 3 seconds. So if the length of next is 0, if there is no next, we go back to the first child again. Otherwise, we keep going to the next image. So that next is a very important method in this scenario. Now, here we are with the next slide source, and we're grabbing the attribute of the next slide, the alt tag of the next slide being the caption, and then the attribute of the next slide will fade in, and the text will fade in. So that's a nice way to code that slideshow, and it gets better on each iteration of what we're trying to achieve here. I'm going to run this lecture until we get out of the slideshow part of this lecture, just to finish what we started, because it really is a nice way. It's especially refreshing to see all this code running in ES6. So this is how we restart it. So we're going to run the slideshow, but watch how the method is called. When we look at this, we always have to see how it's running. So I might want to make sure we don't miss the code here. See run slideshow. This right here is the timer. So this is the start run slideshow. And it restarts at the end. So how does that happen? Well, this code we've already done. We've got the fade out of the original caption and slide, and then the callback, which is what we just went through in this last slide, saying, okay, if the next element is empty, then we're going to make it the first child again. Otherwise, we keep going next. And this is what shows everything. But how it's running is this. We have a timer that equals set interval run slideshow, and this is the function, every 3 seconds. If we stop the slideshow by clicking on slide, if the timer is not empty, we're going to clear it. Remember, clear interval will remove a timer, and then we can unset the value of that variable. Otherwise, we're going to run the slideshow again and make sure it runs at 3 seconds. So it's basically click or not. So starting and stopping, starting and stopping. All right. So I'm going to stop that section right there. This is end of part 1 of the Chapter 9 lecture. I do want to do a click method and show you that functionality. That code again will be in the folder, but let me pause this and get you that code. Okay, this is the slideshow stop, and we're running the same exact slideshow, and when we click on this, it'll stop. So I want to make sure it runs. We're going to wait a few seconds here. Click. There it runs. Now I can click it again, and hopefully it stops. And one way we can check to see is to go into the slideshow itself and see if there's a clear interval. You could actually console.log the timer to see if it has a value. And if it doesn't, or if it does, then, because if it's not null, we'll clear the interval. That would stop it. So you want to see timer 1 and what it has. Just for kicks, let's have fun with this. Let's do it. These lessons are only good if you actually roll up your sleeves and experiment. So what I'm going to do is have a little fun here and go into the slideshow.js. And we've got the click here. So what I want you to see is the console.log. And I'll put this outside of the condition so you can see what timer 1 has. timer 1. So as it changes on click, I can actually, and I'll put something like look, quote, plus the timer 1. So you can see it. Now, when we go back to the browser, right, and we hit refresh, that's this slideshow. It's the slideshow stop. Let's look at the console and see what the timer 1 has to say. I'm going to go to the console. We're going to do a hard refresh and load the new code and click. And if it doesn't show up, it should. Let's see, it's still looping. So we'll let it run, and then we'll take a look. There we go. So hopefully, when I click, see it says look 2. That's the timer. If I do this, you see it's null. That means it's stopped. Click 1. Stop. Look is null. It's still going. So let's see what's happening with this. Okay. Look 11. So now it's stopped because the timer has was loaded. If you look at it stopped completely, that's because at this point, when I clicked, like right now, it's stopped because the timer has a value, because I clicked after the timer showed. That's why the null appears to be a little bit different. See, null, now it's running because the code after null has made it run slideshow. So there's no timer. If it's null, it needs to run. Anyway, kind of cool, right? You can see how the timers are working. So timer 1 is a numeral, and it's telling you how many times that that slideshow has run. So it's fun to get in with jQuery and see what the library is doing with these JavaScript functions to shorthand them and do what we need to do. Any questions on that? I encourage you to reach out to me. It's kind of interesting. I realize there's some bloat with jQuery, but it's I think it's worth it, especially in an age where the networks are fast.